We've been taught to think that the Archie Bunker is the prototype of the super patriot. In fact, Archie is one of its victims, one of super patriotism's victims. He's one of its consumers. He pays the taxes, he bleeds, he sends his kids off and all that, and he falls for it. The suppliers, the pushers of super patriotism, most conspicuously are our top political leaders, our publicists, our media pundits, our institutional heads, including some college presidents and corporation leaders. Super patriotic ideology is assiduously propagated by the ruling class of this society. That is the essence, that has been the essence of the Reagan propaganda effort over these 8 years. Like the anti-communist ideology, which is just the other side of that same coin, it is not a product of mass hysteria, although its goal often is to instigate mass hysteria. But ideas do not float around in social space. You see, there's no such thing as just an idea around like a virus. In fact, viruses don't quite float around. They go according to certain social relations. And so with ideas are mediated through social structure, through social organization, through a social system. That is, through organized status roles, groups, families, schools, communities, media, other institutions, whatever else. And some ideas then are mass marketed. Some ideas are taught to us from day one in those little flag salutes we have at school. That Ronald Reagan isn't just getting off in irrelevant things when he talks about flag salutes and prayers in the schools and pushing those symbols in school. He wants to institutionalize, he wants to internalize within kids at the first grade level, if you will, this gut instinct to wave that flag, to rally around that flag, to get in there when it's the Pueblo or the Grenada or Central America or whatever else, and not ask too many questions and just say, my country, and I love my country, and let's do it. I think it's not a manifestation of individual psychology. I think it's a mediated thing, because the super patriotism, machoism, is not something that just swaggers around in any direction. It's directed toward very particular, specific political goals. It has very specific targets, like Cuba, Vietnam, Nicaragua, the USSR, Grenada. Countries that are, or in case of Grenada, were developing social orders that threatened global capitalism. But in relation to some other countries, the super patriots aren't so macho. In fact, they're very passive, very suffering, very accommodating, very supportive. They don't have the macho virtues that what the patriarchs would call the feminine virtues almost. They're this way when it comes to Chile, Guatemala, El Salvador, Indonesia, South Africa, Israel, South Korea, Zaire. Countries that support the interests of multinational capitalism and imperialism. So psychological categories in politics offer some explanation regarding predispositions, but they do not explain the actual policy directions. For that you have to look at such things as class interests, economic interests, and other such things. One of the key functions of super patriotism is to blur the differences in class interests in our society and try to convince us that we're all in the same boat, rich and poor alike, you, me, the Mellons, the Morgans, the Rockefellers. We are made to believe that the people of the United States have a community of interest with the giant multinationals. The very companies that at any time might export our jobs and abandon and desert our communities in that very unpatriotic way, as I said before. In truth, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, on almost every issue, we the people are not in the same boat with the big financiers and companies. The costs of our policies are not equally shared. We pay the brunt of the costs. The benefits of our policies are not equally enjoyed. We don't get much of that. I give you the case of the Persian Gulf, where it's costing us $2.50 for every dollar's worth of oil that's coming out of the Persian Gulf. That's not so irrational, because we're paying the 2.5 and the oil companies are making the dollar. Even if it's not coming to the U.S., only 4% of that comes to the U.S. The Seven Sisters, the oil companies, the big oil cartels don't care if they sell it in the U.S. or in Japan, France, which is where it's really going. And we're not protecting the oil supply for Japan or France. We are protecting the oil supply of those companies. So there's a case of policy not being shared equally. There's a case where you have to have a class analysis rather than a flag-waving analysis. This is true, by the way, this is equally true of ancient empires as well as modern empires. In 1919, the conservative economist, very prominent economist, a very creative one too, Joseph Schumpeter, he described the imperialism of classical Rome in words that might sound familiar to present-day Americans. Quote, "That policy which pretends to aspire to peace but unerringly generates war, the policy of continual preparation for war, the policy of meddlesome interventionism." He's writing in 1919 about ancient Rome. "There was no corner of the known world where some interest was not alleged to be in danger or under attack. If the interests were not Roman, they were those of Rome's allies. And if Rome had no allies, then allies would be invented. When it was utterly impossible to contrive such an interest, why, then it was the national honor that had been insulted. The fight was always invested with an aura of legality. Rome was always being attacked by evil-minded neighbors, always fighting for a breathing space. The whole world was pervaded by a host of enemies, and it was manifestly Rome's duty to guard against their indubitably aggressive designs. They were enemies who only waited to fall upon the Roman people. Such a policy can be understood," Schumpeter continues, "only by ascertaining what, quote, domestic class interests benefited from it." Even, you see, conservatives can have a class analysis as long as it's 2,000 years ago. They won't do it here. What domestic class interests benefited from the growth, the ruthlessness, the power of the Roman Empire? Schumpeter goes on, he says, "Those who gained were the aristocracy of landlords, agricultural entrepreneurs, born of struggle against their own people, whose dominance rested," that is the entrepreneurs and landlords, "their dominance rested on control of the state machine." The historian Ernst Badian, also talking about Rome, "No administration in history has ever devoted itself so wholeheartedly to fleecing its subjects for the private benefit of its ruling class as Rome of the last age of the Republic." And he too was writing before the Reagan administration came into office.